Neuwärts FM Transformer wird präsentiert vom Transformationswerk, der Workshop- und Event-Location für Neues. Informationen zu Räumen, Menschen und Methoden auf transformationswerk.de.
Welcome to the playground.
You think you've seen it all? Neuwärts FM.
Ready for transformation? Who says that doesn't work?
And here is your host, Ingo Stoll.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Neuwärts FM Transformer podcast. It's episode number 45 and yet another international guest is with us today. It's going to be Professor Toby Walsh, and we focus on the impact of AI technology on us and our future society. So, without further ado, let's get into the latest insights on artificial intelligence. Enjoy.
Insights.
We have another guest, and I'm pretty excited to say hello and welcome to Professor Toby Walsh. You had a long trip, right, coming from Australia, and you work for the University of New South Wales and delivered your keynote just a couple of minutes ago about what AI can do. So, welcome, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. What is it that AI can do?
In theory, AI could make us healthier, wealthier, and happier if we let it. It's a technology that's set to transform our lives. In fact, it's hard not to open a newspaper today and see some new task that AI is able to do. But there's a lot of misconceptions that people have about what AI can and can't do, especially today, what AI can and can't do. I like to say to people that really we can build idiot savants. We can build an AI that can do a very specified, narrow task well, whether that be playing the ancient Chinese game of Go, answering Jeopardy questions, reading mammograms, perhaps better than your doctor, fighting air-to-air combat. Pick a narrow domain, and if we put enough time and effort into it, today we can probably build, or in the very near future, build a computer program that can do that as well as any human can do. And once we can do it as well as any human, there's no reason to suppose maybe we could do it even better. And so there's an ability there to transform almost every aspect of our lives, whether that be our businesses, so that we can run them more efficiently, make better decisions, whether that's our education system, so that we can have personalized tutoring systems, or our medical systems, so that all of us can have the very best healthcare. I mean, I like to point out people, some of the good futures that we could choose to end up in, where we take the very best diagnostic tools, we put them in an app, we take that into the third world, and we take first world healthcare into the third world. People die, thousands of people dying every day, needlessly, for diseases that we know how to fix with pennies. If only we could get that sort of medical knowledge out into the third world, and we could do that with already existing technologies. Sometimes, if you listen to speakers here at the CeBIT, for example, or if you read the newspapers, it's that some people say we are on the doorstep of a completely new era. So what do you think? Are we? We are, I think, on the doorstep of a new era. I think this is the information revolution. There's a historical precedent. We went through the Industrial Revolution when we were liberated from the limits of our muscles. And that happened 100 or so years ago, and that completely changed the nature of our society and the nature of our work. And we're going through a similar transformation where we're going to be liberated from the limitations of our brains, our cognitive tasks. That many tasks that we think of today will be done by a computer. This is going to be a real transformation to our societies, and ones where, if we get it right, we could live quite interesting lives. I think actually it could be the next Renaissance. We could be all given time to do all the interesting things, and the robots could take the sweat. Of course, that's not the only future. There are other futures that we could end up with. And then I think as a society, we get to make those choices today as to how we prepare for those changes. When we went through the Industrial Revolution, we did go through some profound societal changes to deal with that technological disruption. We invented the welfare system. We invented universal education so that people could be educated to have a job because they weren't just going to be working out in the fields. And I think we're going through an equally profound change. The technology, the sort of technologies that I'm working on will require society to adjust to.
And what does or could make you positive about, leading us to a future society where we mostly benefit from these new technologies and don't give way to one of these futures that is more like devastating and dystopia?
Well, certainly Hollywood gives us some very bad dystopian futures that we could end up with, and we could. If we sleepwalk into the future, I think we would inevitably end up in one of these bad futures, that the pressure of technological change without any pushback would get us there. We got it right last time with the Industrial Revolution. I mean, there were people like Karl Marx who predicted some very poor futures where wealth will be concentrated in the hands of the few, the people, the owners of production. And we made some structural changes to our society, the way that we distributed wealth, the way that we educated people so they could have jobs, the welfare system that we set in place so that we all benefited from rising prosperity. And we did. We lived lives much more comfortable than our parents did, and our parents lived much more comfortable lives than our grandparents did. So it is possible for us as a society to make those choices. And I think people are becoming increasingly aware that, again, it's one of these periods of disruption. And that, if many jobs, clearly, if you're a taxi driver or a truck driver, autonomous cars, autonomous trucks that are being developed today are very likely to take your job. Now, we don't know whether that means that there will be more unemployment or not. All technologies create new jobs as well as destroy jobs.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is neutral, right? Like nuclear power. You can build a bomb, or you can, produce energy to light up whatever.
Yes, the technology could be used for good or for bad, and we get to choose. It's not inevitable that it gets used for bad. We can choose it to be used for good. There's this interesting question, will many people be put out of work? We don't know the answer to that question. We do know that in the past, more jobs were created by technology than destroyed. More people are employed on the planet today than have ever been employed, despite the fact that all those jobs working in agriculture disappeared in the Industrial Revolution. We invented lots of new jobs in offices, in factories. Our economies have grown significantly since then, and our population has expanded, and yet unemployment is at historically low levels. So in the past, that's the case. We had an advantage because we still had our brains. The Industrial Revolution liberated us from the limits of our muscles, but they still left all the cognitive tasks for us. The interesting challenge is that this time the revolution is going to take away many of the cognitive tasks, and there's a challenging question, well, what's left for us humans?
So do you think an AI engine will be the next Karl Marx, inventing a new model, leading us to future society? Or are we still able to design such a complex role model?
We're still a long way away from having human-level intelligence. We're still only building intelligence to do one narrow, focused task. And if you ask my colleagues, I actually asked 300 of my colleagues recently in a survey how long it would take for us to get human-level intelligence, and the median response was 2109, so 100 years or so away. So there's still quite a bit of work. I still have immense respect for the human brain. It's the most complex system in the universe. By orders of magnitude, nothing approaches the billions of neurons, the trillions of connections. So I still have a huge respect for what the human brain can do in the breadth of ability, our ability to work in new situations, our ability to learn very rapidly. We still can't do any of that with machines. Perhaps, 100 years' time we will actually get machines. But at the moment, that's still narrow task. that narrow task might being a politician. I think some of our politicians are a bit robotic these days. They don't particularly answer the question you ask them. I'm not so sure it would be that challenging to if we
don't need any names to think about narrow minds maybe these days, but
minds. And they may be more unbiased if we're careful to engineer them so they're more unbiased than our politicians. So it's an interesting question whether we would actually hand over those sorts of decisions to machines or not. But I think that's one of these interesting questions. We have to start thinking about what decisions should we hand over to machines. There are some decisions that we should hand to machines, and perhaps some decisions, judicial decisions in our criminal system, decisions in our political system, maybe we should just leave to humans. That it's part of our humanity, part of the thing that makes us special. Because the machines still have various limitations. They have very little emotional intelligence. They have no consciousness yet, no sentience, no desires, They're much more challenged than us in all those respects, and so equally, that's why I believe we shouldn't give life or death decisions to machines in the battlefield.
Yeah.
This is an area where I feel that we should just let humans make those sorts of decisions.
So just to stick a little bit to society level. So what are the concepts, maybe involving new concepts that you see now being discussed for, let's say, what we do in 10 years' time, because nobody knows what we do in 100 years, but we need to know, and we need to start the discussions and make the decisions now, because the technology is rapidly running and we don't have time left to, wait and see.
You're right. I do think that the clock is really ticking on some of these issues, and we have to start making some profound decisions that may impact upon, for example, how we run our education system, or how we run our welfare system, or how we tax wealthy people or large corporations, because it's not clear that we're doing a very good job of that yet.
So when some of these ideas, just to mention maybe some, so I would be interested to see what you think about this. For example, you mentioned robots, taking over jobs that can be automated. So what do you think about taxing robots, taxing machines?
Oh, it's clear robots will take jobs. If you are a taxi driver or a truck driver today, autonomous taxis and trucks are already being trialed. You should wake up to the fact that job is going to disappear. It's going to be much cheaper, much safer to have a robot do that.
But do we need to tax the machines in order to raise money to spend it on our social systems, for example? If it's because labor is one of these factors that earn the money actually for governments, for states, for social tasks to be fulfilled. So if you exchange the human labor by a machine that doesn't need to pay taxes. So what do you think about these ideas? Robots need to.
We have to think of some of these ideas. I'm not an economist, so I'm not a complete expert at saying these things. I think I can see there's some real technical challenges with taxing robots in terms of trying to define what a robot is and making sure that they continue to pay. And so often the jobs will disappear not because someone physically introduces a robot. No. That means
could
someone
be an
else.
Algorithm.
It could be an algorithm in the cloud. It could be some other business starts up that never employed anyone. So no one was actually ever made unemployed by a robot. It just the wealth was generated elsewhere. But I think we made some pretty radical changes when we introduced the Industrial Revolution in terms of protecting the people who only own their labor. We'll have to think of some pretty radical changes this time. Maybe it's going to be universal basic income. Maybe it's going to be negative tax rates. I think it's clear also that we're not getting large corporations to pay their way, and we're going to have to reconsider ways to make sure that they support the communities in which they actually are generating much of their wealth. It's clear that large companies are not paying their way, and this is not sustainable.
Because you mentioned the economists. I mean, I studied this myself, and I still have somehow the feeling that, we have the only system that is left is capitalism on the global level. But it has its limitations, and this is what we see. We talk about sustainable development, for example, and some other concepts. So do you think it's the economists again defining the new, capitalism 2.0?
I don't
next
think
level?
it's a task for just economists, because it goes to the very structure of our society. You know, the nature of us. Many of us define ourselves through our work. I mean, our status in society is defined that. So it goes to the core of how we run our society, how we run our political systems, how we run our economic systems. So I think there's potentially profound changes at all levels of a society that we have to consider. It's easy always to blame the economists, but we do need to make some radical changes so that we can all share the prosperity. Yeah. That may require us, rethinking taxation. It may require us, for example, to rethink the nature of the corporation. It's certainly the case that capitalism is about the only game left in town. But unregulated capitalism clearly doesn't work. Yeah. You do have to regulate the market. If you let the market run wild, then it goes to excesses. And so there's a real role for government in terms of regulating the market, and that we give a lot of freedoms to companies to act and to generate the wealth that they do in return for how they participate in society. I'm not sure we've got that quite right yet. Again, I'm not an economist, but I certainly can say, if we looked towards Scandinavia and some of the models they have in terms of a more participatory environment in which the workers own more of the company, and the companies are more answerable to their workers as well as their shareholders. There are a number of things that we will need to think about in terms of these relationships, so that there was a nice quote that was going around recently, so that all of us benefit from this rising tide, not just the super yachts.
Maybe we just come to a very down-to-earth phenomenon that everybody knows. Let's talk about Facebook, because we're talking about AI sometimes in a bubble like, machine learning. I mean, if you ask somebody out on the street what is deep learning, machine learning, they will not answer any appropriate thing, because it's completely abstract.
Yes,
but we find AI today in many areas, and they make an impact. For example, the Facebook algorithm, the newsfeed, the news you see. I mean, who's selecting what we do see, what news we receive, right?
We have a saying in AI that when we succeed in AI, it has a habit of disappearing out of sight. So that all the time now in your everyday life, you're actually interacting with bits of AI algorithms, smart algorithms, that are changing your life. Every time you do a Google search, every time you do a Google Translate, every time you ask Siri a question, every time you look on Facebook, the things that you see are dictated by algorithms that are using things like machine learning, deep learning, to decide what you get to see. And we're starting to realize that can have quite profound impacts upon our society. The fact that many of us get our news these days from Facebook means that they're replacing the conventional media. And now we're actually witnessing the consequence of that in the United States, where we have a television president who is, in some sense, in part caused by the bubble that people live in when they see just their Facebook news, and the responsibility that companies like Facebook have, where they serve up our news, where they use algorithms, and that maybe we have to enforce that those companies like Facebook take more responsibility for what they do, because they are actually changing our political system.
So whose task is it to regulate, or let's say to bring transparency to the Facebook algorithms and co?
I think it's our duty as citizens of democracies to demand it, and it's our duty of our politicians to enact a law to enable it to happen. I think the challenge here is that society and law changes much more slowly than technology, and these technologies have quickly been eating into our lives, and we're starting to wake up to the profound impact that they can have. And it's hard for politics and law to catch up, but certainly in Europe, I think our politicians are starting to wake up to the consequences and starting to wake up to the fact that it does require some significant moves from government, and we can't just let the Silicon Valley ethos and culture allow our lives to be changed and our political systems to be just disrupted by giving them a complete free hand.
But do you think it's odd that German politicians travel to the Silicon Valley to learn from the Silicon Valley how to, how the digital world runs and what the mindset actually primes.
Well, there's a real challenge, I think, here, which is that at the same time as we're going through these societal changes, we're going through all these big financial changes. And in some sense, I can see some of the technology companies being given a free pass because people want to make sure that they succeed. So, for example, we see this with autonomous cars. There's very little control of how people are prototyping autonomous cars on public roads. And there should be much more control. And in part, I suspect this is because people want to win this business. We're not clear that it's going to be Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, Ford, or General Motors, who are the car companies of 20 years' time. This is a $1 trillion industry we're talking about. It could be Tesla, Apple, and Google, who are the car companies of 20 years' time, because the car companies of 20 years' time are going to be the technology companies that build autonomous cars. And in the race to get to these technological changes, we may not actually be, putting enough legislation in the way. Our governments may be a bit too keen to win the business and not keen enough to protect the more vulnerable people in society, the pedestrians, the cyclists, and everyone else who have to share the roads with these autonomous cars.
Well, what we can see when we enter the field of the big digital players and the government and the national laws. I mean, for example, talking about fake news, how many days or how many hours is Facebook allowed to keep up identified fake news? I mean, we're talking about is 3 days, is it okay, or 24 hours, or are they willing at all? What can we do if they reject? And there's a lot of uncertainty how to deal with these aspects.
There's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm pleased to say the discussion is moving on quite rapidly. A year ago, Facebook was saying it's not their responsibility, and somehow they were allowed to get away with saying that. Today, they no longer say that. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg actually wrote a post recently where he said, actually, AI is the solution to many of these problems about how to filter. and he's probably right. You can only filter at the sort of scale, the planet-wide scale, the billions of Facebook updates that are coming into Facebook every day if you start to use algorithms. But they're starting to wake up to the fact that they have responsibility, and I think politicians are starting to realize that maybe they need to be regulated, just like the regular media. If they are taking on the role of the regular media in terms of serving most of our news to us, then they need the responsibilities that we have given to the regular media in terms of their, giving us, filtering fake news from real news and giving us an ability to make unbiased decisions about our lives. And we're starting to see with things like Brexit and with Trump, the consequences if we don't. And we're seeing increasing dissatisfaction in society. And we're seeing increasingly the bubbles that people live in, the media bubbles that people live in, that social media allow to continue. So I think people are starting to wake up. We've still got some way to go in terms of formal regulation, in terms of the technology companies answering to their responsibilities. But at least the conversation's happening now, and it wasn't happening maybe a year ago.
Yeah. What comes up to my mind is if you say we the people, we are the ones that need to demand transparency, that need to say I want to know if an algorithm says yes or no, why, and not how the algorithm is structured. I want to know exactly on this single decision, for example, if my credit demand was declined by an algorithm, why? And of course, we're talking about regulation, but we have the lobbying, we have strong forces, saying, you might get some information, but, this is a company secret. We can't give our algorithms away because they're going to be copied. So it's so many aspects. And just to add another one, when we talk about blockchain technology, there's no need for regulation in many aspects. So we have new technologies coming up, taking away the layer of regulation in a way that it gives transparency to all of us. But that's my question. Do you think we are able to cope?
There are still immense challenges to answer these sorts of questions, and there are challenges at many different levels. I mean, at least Europe is ahead of the curve. The European Parliament has legislation that's coming into force, which will demand that you can, if an algorithm makes a decision about you, you can ask for an explanation. There's a real political challenge that we don't know what that means yet. We have no idea what the politicians really mean. I don't think the politicians have any idea what they really mean. So we're going to have to work out what will be acceptable. A dump of zeros and ones is not going to be acceptable. It won't explain anything to you. And there's a real technical challenge there, is because we still, as AI researchers, we still don't know how to make algorithms that can explain themselves. There's still black boxes that don't have an explanation. We've just started to work on this problem. It will take us some time to come up with some good solutions to this problem. But at least we're waking up to this idea. But there are, some immense challenges at many levels, legal, political, and technical, that we need to solve. And yet we're already giving the right to algorithms to make decisions about deciding our credit scores, about deciding how much our car insurance costs, all these things that are impacting upon our lives. So people have to start worrying about this, and we have to start worrying about, who has your data. When you click on, giving up that data to Facebook, should Facebook be allowed even to ask that question? I frequently, log onto websites and think, well, they shouldn't be allowed to have that data, really. There's no need for them to have that. That's intrusive. The fact that they can even ask me to have that data, and the fact that most people, just click, yes, I want to use the app, whatever. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to ask these sorts of questions.
Well, that brings me to the question: if we just step, like, let's say 10 years into the future. Let's pretend it's 2027. We're sitting here looking back to our talk from today. Probably will be recoverable, the MP3 file somewhere, and we listen to what we say today, what we think today. So 10 years from now, so what do we need to have achieved in the meantime to still stay on the good road, to still have more benefits than risks from technology and from AI innovation?
I think we have to have started reinventing our education system. We have to have started reinventing our taxation system. We have to have started reinventing our political systems. It's clear our taxation system's broken currently. We're not taxing wealthy corporations. We're not taxing the rich enough. The inequality is only increasing, and technology is only going to amplify that if we don't let it go away. It's clear there's a huge dissatisfaction with our political systems, and a huge misunderstanding and the fake news issues and so on. And so politics is completely broken, it seems, at the moment. And if we're going to have jobs in the future, it's clear that we're going to have to reinvent our education system so that we are educated to the new jobs that will exist in 15 years' time, because they will be technologies that were only invented in 10 years' time, right? And we'll have to realize that education is a lifelong thing. It's not something that you do at school. It's not something that you do to university. It's something that you're going to have to do throughout your life, because otherwise there'll be a new technology invented in 10 years' time that will take your job away. And so we're going to have to invent educational systems that allow us to learn on the job. And responsible companies are going to be the ones that allow you to grow as an individual and allow you to reskill and retrain and keep ahead of this tidal wave of technology. And irresponsible companies will be ones that employ you. And we're moving more and more to a gig economy. How we filter this into a gig economy where we don't have the security of job. How do you re-educate yourself when someone's not paying for you to do that? These are, really interesting questions. I hope we can get it right, because, in some sense, there are profound challenges facing our society today. The ongoing global financial crisis. By the way, I predict in 10 years' time we'll still be in the global financial crisis. It's something that's the new type of economics that we have. That's it. You just print money. That's how economics works. Well, the global climate change will really be hurting us at that point. We'll be seeing some significant changes that will be impacting upon agriculture, upon our weather, upon the destruction that storms make upon our cities, on flooding. So we'll be seeing some profound impacts that has. We'll be seeing, the global refugee problem will be ongoing. We'll be seeing, many more millions of sad people displaced by war and poverty from where they used to be. And the challenges that will be stressing on our first world economies to deal with absorbing that. Our only hope in some sense is technology. The only thing that got us the last 50 years of progress, the fact that we lived lives better than our parents, that our parents lived lives better than our grandparents, is technological change, most of that from information technology. So in some sense, it's the only hand we've got to play. So I hope we're playing a good hand. Because after all, computers can play very good poker today.
Yeah. I think this is what is left up to us, If you think of, somebody who's not that much into this discussion, not in the intellectual bubble of talking about, what we discussed the last half an hour. So I would break it down to a question of attitude and mindset. If you say we need to reinvent education, the system, so what would you say would be a good way to bring people, the one individuum, to keep up or to start the way this path requires? Says, what can I do if the digital world is not my world now, but it will be? So I have to onboard somehow, but I'm not a technical guy. I don't feel that comfy with all these equipments.
That's a great question. And so, bringing it down to something that's very personal, I think is a very useful thing to do. And I say to some people, if you're technically minded, like, a geek like you or I, then that's fine. We can go off and we can continue to try and invent the future. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for people like us. But there's plenty, even more perhaps, opportunity for other skills, and the things that, if you're not a geek, if you're not technically minded, you don't love playing with the latest technologies, there's lots of things you can do. And there's two areas that I suggest to people you should focus on. One is emotional intelligence. If you're emotionally, computers are emotionally illiterate. They have no emotional lives. They have no emotional understanding. And we're going to increasingly value people who do. The people who become CEOs are the people with the great emotional intelligence, not the geeks like me and you and I. The people who understand people, and we're going to appreciate those human skills. So, become a psychologist, become a salesperson, do the most people-facing thing that you can think of. Because computers, for a very long time, if forever, will always be challenging those things. And we will value more and more in our societies the social interactions. They're going to become increasingly important parts of our lives, because the computers can do all the other things, and then we won't have to bother with them. And then the other thing is that the other challenging area for computers is creativity. Computers are still very creatively challenged. There's a few nice examples of computers writing poems and composing songs, but we're still only beginning to understand the idea of creativity. And we humans are much more creative still than the computers. So do the most creative things that you can think of, the artistic or the artisan. So, go off and make, homemade bread, homemade cheese, become a novelist, a painter, a composer. These things, again,
you can see art in artificial, right?
Yes, the art in artificial. You can see the grassroots of this already in hipster culture, which already values the artisan and the handmade. And if we believe economists, of course, the price of goods will adjust, and we will increasingly value. Economists would have us believe that the market will adjust, and we will increasingly value the things made by the human hand. We already see this actually in the fine art market. The supersonic prices that go for fine art. We increasingly value things that, are not mass-produced, not produced by machine, but things that are made by an individual's hand. And so I say to people, this could be the next renaissance. If the machines take all the sweat and generate all the wealth, we could be left with the time to do all the artistic and artisan things that we want, and spend all the time, a great flowering and enlightenment, where we do the things that we do well, and the machines take the sweat and hard work away from us.
I would love to see that, definitely, coming true. And we are all part of it. Everybody can, start today making decisions, re-questioning his own attitude towards technology, whether when you're afraid today, you don't have to be tomorrow. It's you just outline some different perspectives on how to deal and approach the future.
Yeah, I think we need to embrace the future. I also think we have to think about, pressing our political masters for change, because this won't happen without some change as well. If we just sleepwalk into the future.
We have to be on the streets again?
I think we certainly need to.
Or is it just a like click? It
I'm
won't
not
do,
sure. I'm not sure a
probably.
like click is enough. But we have to. People have to be aware of where we're going and demand the things that we want as a society. And then people are starting to wake up. The conversation is certainly happening much more rapidly than it has in the last couple of years. People are starting to realize there are some fundamental issues here about how we change. There was, in the Industrial Revolution, some profound changes. It has to be noted that in the Industrial Revolution, there was also a period where people's livelihood went backwards for a while before it went forwards.
Well, we've seen 2 world wars in between. The last 100 years.
We saw 2 world wars. That's the distressing thing. We saw there were some large kicks to society. We went through 2 world wars. We went through the Great Depression. There were some things that helped society change rapidly. Maybe the global financial crisis, maybe climate change are the kicks that we need to change our society. Society doesn't tend to change unless there is something forcing it. So maybe we will have to, force it a little bit. But, in some sense, it's our only hope as well. If we are going to, our population is going to increase upon the planet, we live longer lives. That's all great things. But, we have to embrace technology. We have to embrace the change. And, if we do the right things, if we make the right choices, we can follow a good path. And it will, make all our lives happier, wealthier, and happier.
Well, Professor Toby Walsh, I thank you for taking your time out of a busy day here in Hanover. And for all those listeners who would like to cover more of you, of your studies, of your publications, publishings, so where would you send people to?
Well, at risk of self-promotion, I'd encourage you to take a look at my blog, thefutureofai.blogspot.com.au. And later this year, I've actually written a book for the general public. It's called It's Alive, From the Logic Piano to Killer Robots.
Oh.
You'll be able to buy it on Amazon. It's actually, you can pre-order it already, the ebook on Amazon. So it's an introduction to where AI is today, where it came from, and where it might take us in the future, and goes into many of the issues that we talked about today in more detail, written for the general public, for the interested people to think about where is this all going to end.
Great. We will cover the link within the show notes. You will find them there. So, thanks again.
My pleasure.
It will be a discussion leading on for the next probably decade. So hope to see you again somewhere, somehow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I still find myself thinking about what Professor Walsh said. He said, when we succeed in AI, it has a habit of disappearing out of sight. Well, I hope you keep your eyes wide open and remain wide awake on the emerging relevance of AI technology. I will, that's for sure. And for sure as well is that we meet again in 2 weeks' time with the episode number 46. We have a very special guest then. It's going to be Alan Chester, and we talk about the topic of music imitating innovation. And I can promise you some innovation on the Neuwerts FM Transformer podcast as well. So be surprised, you will. And it's up to me to say thanks for listening and for taking your time. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And leave a comment in the show notes if you want, neuwerts.fm/transformer/045 or at the favorite social channel of your choice. And I'm Ingo Stoll, and I say bye-bye, thank you, and happy transformation.